Today on This Week in Iowa, the use of COVID relief dollars in question, what the auditor says the governor did. And the U.S. Transportation Secretary talks infrastructure, plus a sit-down with U.S. Senator Joni Ernst, the biggest issues facing Iowa, America, and the world. Today on This Week in Iowa. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us here today. I'm Sabrina Ahmed. Well, Iowa's auditor and its governor are at odds over how nearly $450,000 of federal COVID-19 relief dollars were spent. A state audit released this week shows Governor Kim Reynolds' office used the money to pay salaries for staff members even after repeated warnings not to do so. Local 5's Mary Sugden has more.
We told her to maintain documentation and have them be doing work that was directly impacting the pandemic, but she didn't take our advice, and here we are.
Iowa State Auditor Rob Sand says Governor Reynolds' staffing level was approved pre-pandemic, which is why he's confused nearly $450,000 of federal COVID relief dollars were needed to cover salaries for 21 employees.
The governor had a larger amount of people on staff than she had a budget to pay for. And instead of either getting a bigger budget or reducing her personal staff size, she went and she used some of these COVID dollars to pay staff salaries.
He says his office made it clear Reynolds' staff didn't have the direct impact on the pandemic needed to qualify for these funds, and suggested the money be used on more direct costs, for example, COVID-19 testing.
And so at the end of the day, what we saw was a spreadsheet that was altered, where it said that originally this is the amount of budget shortfall that we have in the governor's office. And then they simply changed that heading to say this was COVID related.
A spokesperson with Reynolds' office sent Local 5 a statement saying the U.S. Department of Treasury confirmed the use of coronavirus relief funds to reimburse salaries and benefits is an allowable expense. He goes on to say, during this time, the governor's staff spent a vast majority of their time responding to the pandemic. In fact, many members of Governor Reynolds' staff worked 7 days a week out of the State Emergency Operations Center to provide direct support to Iowans. This has always been our justification for the expense. The governor's office says it's working with the Treasury Department to provide the documentation it needs, something the office told us last year when these accusations were first raised.
I don't know why, after having been asked twice and twice saying that they did not have any, they're now telling the public, oh, don't worry, we're working on putting together documentation.
That was Mary Sugden reporting. Sand says if the department rejects those documents, the state would be on the hook to repay those dollars. Coming up on This Week in Iowa, if you drink water, use the internet, or drive on roads, this one is for you. I chat with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg about infrastructure. The president has signed the infrastructure bill into law. It puts $1.3 trillion into our economy. It's new spending, about billions of dollars of it. How much is coming to Iowa? And what are those dollars earmarked for? I talked to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg about what this means for you. You know, 16% of households don't have an internet subscription. 2.4% of Iowans don't even have access to internet in where they live. So talk to me about why this will impact Iowans and what directly it will do to those people who can't have internet in their homes.
Thanks, Sabrina. Well, as you know, I spent a lot of time in Iowa a couple of years ago, and one theme that I heard again and again and again, especially in rural areas, but not only in rural areas, is the importance of getting good broadband access to the internet. It's not just something that's nice to have anymore. You need it. You need it to get a job. You need it to do your homework. Farmers count on it in order to be able to access everything from market information to weather. And it's as important, in my view, to be on the internet as it is to be connected to the interstate highway system. It's why the president insisted that we have provisions in this infrastructure bill to get everybody connected. And so Iowans can count on at least $100 million flowing to the state to help make that possible, as well as policies that are going to help make sure that the internet is affordable. We've got to make sure that it's not only there, but that families and small businesses can have access to it. When we do that, we level the playing field, and I'd say in the 21st century, that is infrastructure just the same as roads and bridges and pipes are infrastructure.
So is that through programs where people can sign up to receive rebates on their internet, or how does that work? Does the federal government dictate that, or is that something that will happen on a state level?
So a lot of this will be guided by the Commerce Department, and again, it's a combination of funding to support the development of the kind of fiber and other backbone that gets the internet out to where it needs to be, and policies to make sure that there is healthy competition in the marketplace, because sometimes you can get internet, but it's not affordable. And if that's the result of any kind of unfair practice, then there's a chance now to do something about that.
You mentioned the importance of broadband, just the way roads and bridges are important, but those roads and bridges in Iowa are deteriorating. We have some horrible roads, even in the center of some of our biggest cities, right here in Des Moines. Talk to me about what these dollars will do, not just this year, but over the next 5 and 10 years.
That's right. I've driven on my share of Iowa
yes,
roads.
You have.
And look, winter's coming. We know that the freeze-thaw cycle in that Midwestern climate is especially hard on roads. That's why having $3.4 billion to make sure that the state and local communities can pursue upgrades, can use some of these latest materials that are going to have more endurance in the tough weather, make sure that not just in the cities, but out in the counties, rural areas as well, there's that support. It's crucially important, as are bridges. There are a handful of bridges that get a lot of the attention because they have tens of thousands of commuters going over them. But there are also thousands of bridges around the community around the country in smaller communities that make such a difference. If it goes out of service, sometimes somebody has to drive the better part of an hour to find an alternate route, which is why the $432 million that will come to Iowa for bridge repair and improvement is, I think, just as important as what we're doing on the roads.
Clean drinking water is an issue that I continue to hear about from Iowans who live in big cities, Iowans who live in rural communities, and it's all deciding, who is the person or the location that needs to try to fix this problem. So what can these dollars from the infrastructure bill do to help with clean drinking water in Iowa?
Well, the big focus right now is making sure that we eliminate those lead service lines. They're still all over this country, and we know medicine science tells us there is no such thing as a safe level of lead exposure for children. And dollar for dollar, I can't think of a better investment than preventing the lead poisoning that can affect a child's development, growth, and safety for their entire lives. That's why the president has insisted that we get rid of every lead service line. It's another universal thing. Just like we're saying 100% of the country ought to be on fast, affordable internet, we're saying that 100% of the country ought to be able to count on being rid of those lead service lines, never have to worry about it again. There are other provisions that support the EPA in other sources of pollution and dealing with that too, that has health as well as environmental benefits. And it's just one of those fundamental things, right? I mean, everybody needs water. You need water to live. It ought to be clean, readily available. And I know it often falls to municipal authorities to provide water service. I had to do that as mayor. We just want to make sure that those local authorities get the help that they need and deserve from the government.
For someone who's sitting at home, hearing infrastructure and perhaps kind of getting a glazed look over their eyes, thinking, oh, this doesn't apply to me, why do you want Iowans at home to find this important?
I guess the way I would put it is this is only going to affect you personally if you happen to drink water, drive on a road, or use the internet, in which case this really does mean something to you. It's something for everybody. This is the biggest investment we've made in American infrastructure since the Eisenhower era. By some measures, it's the biggest investment we've made ever. And you don't have to work on infrastructure every day like me to be affected by it. Your community, the jobs, the availability of everything from efficiently moving agricultural exports across the country out of Iowa to making sure that you got a good airport service in Des Moines, to being able to count on a glass of clean, safe drinking water without having to give it a second thought. These are the kinds of things that actually by design you're not supposed to have to think about that much. We want to worry about these things so you don't have to. Take those obstacles away, whether the obstacle is a bridge that's out of service or not being able to get access to good transit or anything else that might stand in your way, so that you can focus on the things you care about most in life, even if, unlike me, transportation is not one of the things you care about most in life. That's kind of the point.
Secretary Buttigieg, I really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for being with us.
Same here. Good being with you.
Inflation also on the top of minds of Iowans. What are our representatives doing about it? I sit down with Senator Joni Ernst next. Inflation. We're all talking about it. We're all thinking about it. We're all worried about it when we go fill up our cars with gas, or perhaps get food from the grocery store. It's the first topic I talked about with U.S. Senator Joni Ernst. Take a listen to our conversation.
It is an issue in Iowa, and I hear it all across the state. It doesn't matter if you're in a metro area, the rural areas. Inflation is impacting every Iowa family. So there are a number of causes, and we know that primarily it's going back to COVID and the struggles that we've had with COVID-19. However, it's exacerbated now because we have a huge level of federal government spending and a lot of money being pushed out the door by the federal government, but not necessarily the goods and supplies at the other end to purchase. So that is part of the cause of inflation. But then we have supply chain issues. And I just was at a small business roundtable discussion, and the businesses were bringing up, why can't we bring back manufacturing to the United States? That would maybe help. And that is a great idea. We want to produce goods domestically, but we have to have the workforce. And right now, the federal government is incentivizing people to stay home. Or there's a group of folks that were close to retirement age during COVID that just decided, I'm going to go ahead and retire. So we have this gap in the number of people that are in our workforce and in the labor pool. So there's a lot of issues there. Solutions: one, federal government, let's not spend money we don't need to be spending right now. Two, let's stop incentivizing people to stay at home. Let's encourage them to return to work. We know that we can do that safely and responsibly. So there's just a couple solutions there, but then as well, just making sure that as much that we can do here in the United States to produce goods and services, we should do that.
I'll just, because it is kind of all tied together, I want to talk a little bit about just the COVID pandemic,
yes.
And more so kind of moving out of the COVID pandemic as people are getting vaccinated. You know,
Right.
There's a lot of conversation right now, a lot of lawsuits right now, a lot of federal government mandates right now, pushback against those mandates. What do you think is the solution to getting people vaccinated? Because I know you're vaccinated, and I know you believe in science and believe in vaccinations.
Yes, and I think that's important too, is that people should be speaking out in their communities if they're in favor of the vaccines. And what I would say is, if you have questions about vaccinations, don't rely on a message coming from a social media platform. Okay, please visit with your own personal physician. Talk about the challenges and the concerns that you have as an individual, and your doctor can best advise you on the right path forward. As far as the federal vaccine mandates, I don't support those, and I don't think the federal government should be telling individuals what they should be putting into their bodies. I don't think they should be telling those employers, you must do this or we are going to fine you. It's different if an individual employer is requiring an employee to get a vaccination. That is different. But the federal government stepping in and mandating, I believe, is wrong.
So what is the answer then to get people vaccinated? Because there's a huge gap and there's concern. I mean, if you look at the number of people who are hospitalized, such a vast majority of them are not vaccinated and they're dying.
And again, I think the message has to be that we do believe in science, and we believe in making sure that you are protecting yourself and especially protecting your loved ones. That's why I do believe in receiving the vaccine. But again, it's a very personal decision. And so again, I recommend speaking to physicians, people that maybe know or understand your own health requirements or maybe the concerns that you might have. So if we can better educate the public, I think we'll all be a lot better off.
You mentioned misinformation. Do you believe social media companies should play a part in preventing the spread of misinformation?
Well, this is a really great question, and one that we have wrangled with for years now, whether it was COVID, whether it's other issues that might be in the news. there is so much misinformation, one way or another on social media platforms. And we as a federal government are trying to figure out how do we move forward knowing that this is a private entity that is hosting this social media platform. How can we as a government go in and require them to censor information or tell them not to? Again, federal government getting involved with private entities. There has to be a balance there. We haven't figured out what is the right solution to move forward in Congress.
Do you think that's coming? Do you think you can figure out a path forward?
I think there will be some heavy debate on this. This is an issue that the Judiciary Committee has been wrangling with, and I think it'll take a bit longer to find the ultimate solution. And then there will be people that are excited about it, and then there will be a lot of people not so excited about it.
The president's big initiative, the Build Back Better plan, is stalled. Where does Senator Ernst stand? We talk about it next. Infighting on Capitol Hill is nothing new, but it seems to be stalling just about anything from getting done in Washington. I talked to Senator Ernst about one of the president's biggest priorities, his spending package. Speaking of debate, the Build Back Better plan is caught up. It is at a standstill, or maybe not. They say it's not at a standstill. From an outsider's perspective, I haven't. What do you feel like is happening as someone who's there every day in the trenches?
Well, from an insider's perspective, I would say it's caught up. And Republicans are not involved in the process, which has been a hugely disappointing aspect to the Build Back Better plan. But I don't support this initiative. It's a lot of social welfare program expansion that I don't believe we need as the United States. There are ideas that I might agree with, but how they go about them, I don't agree with. So things like child care or paid family leave, those are discussions we should have. But there's a lot wrapped up in the bill that is extremely costly, will hurt American farmers with huge pieces of the Green New Deal being implemented. But we don't even know what the text is truly going to look like. We don't know what the cost will be. We don't know what the tax implications will be. And it's because Democrats in Congress are in total disarray over this plan. Nancy Pelosi has made many different promises that are not consistent with each other. And so to bring all these people together, she had to do a tricky maneuver in the House, which is hard to explain here, but they just deemed it passed. So folks didn't really have to vote on the actual plan. They just deemed it passed. So in the Senate, though, we do have to vote on it. And so our members want to know exactly what is in this bill.
You mentioned paid family leave. At one point in the Build Back Better plan, there was 12 weeks of paid family leave. Now, maybe there's 4 weeks of paid family leave in there. You have had a child. I've had children. As a mom, I cannot imagine walking out of that operating room where I delivered my twins and feeling like I couldn't put food on the table for them and I needed to feed myself and nourish my body to feed my children. Then I had to go back to work the next day or 2 days later. What's the answer there?
Exactly. Well, my answer would be the Cradle Act, which is, it's just one of the many proposals, but it is a piece of legislation that Senator Mike Lee of Utah and I worked on together. We did introduce it a couple of years ago. There are other plans available out there. We've had a lot of discussion about paid family leave, but once again, the Democrats didn't involve us in those discussions. So I would have loved to have had the opportunity to sit down and present a conservative approach that our small businesses are accepting of, because what is proposed, again, heavy-handed federal mandates that hurt small businesses and mom and pop shops. Many large employers can absorb those costs, but for those smaller employers, which in Iowa, 99% of our businesses are small businesses, it really hurts their businesses, being forced to provide that for an employee. So we do have a way to provide that, but again, the Democrats didn't ask us about any of our initiatives or if we wanted to be included. So I think we need to revisit it, but do it separate of the Build Back Better plan, and let's have those real open and honest discussions.
One thing that did pass out of the Senate was the infrastructure bill. This, of course, it passed out of the Senate a while ago, but then it just passed out of the House. But you did not vote for it. Senator Grassley voted for it. Talk to me about why you decided to vote against it, now seeing that Iowa will reap the benefits to the tune of like $3.7 billion for roads and bridges over the next 5 years.
Which, again, everybody's for infrastructure. We can agree on that. But when the bill was proposed, we were told that this bill is completely paid for. That's not true. This bill will saddle our American taxpayers with another $250 billion of debt. And if we're going to, again, have these real open and honest discussions, let's be honest about what we're paying for this infrastructure. So only a small portion will actually go to the roads and bridges. There is a lot more that is in the bill that will not benefit Iowa, and Iowans will be paying for over the next 10 years. Nancy Pelosi's railway system in San Francisco, which will cost our taxpayers $200 million for the next 10 years, every year, because it can't sustain. So there's a lot of things wrapped up in the bill that are probably not going to benefit Iowans. And if we had focused on the bipartisan bill that passed out of the committee I sit on, the Environment and Public Works Committee, it would have been a much better starting place, and it wouldn't have saddled Americans with another $250 billion of debt.
We'll be right back. You're watching This Week in Iowa. Thank you so much for joining us here for This Week in Iowa. Don't forget, we have a podcast. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, for example, on Spotify. And as always, have a wonderful rest of your weekend. We'll see you again next weekend. Have a great Thanksgiving.